July 26, 1981, 3:17 p.m. The late afternoon light streamed through the tall windows of the Emmanuel Atelier, casting long shadows across the pristine, white marble floor. Outside, London hummed with its usual energy, but inside the exclusive boutique on Brook Street, time seemed suspended in silk and anticipation. Princess Diana stood motionless in front of the three-way mirror, her 19-year-old frame draped in 40 yards of ivory silk taffeta that would, in just 3 days, make her the most watched bride in history. The dress was magnificent, a fairy tale creation with its 25-foot train, hand-sewn pearls, and intricate embroidery that had taken months to complete. Every detail was perfection, from the antique lace that had belonged to Queen Mary to the tiny blue bow sewn discreetly inside for luck. But Diana couldn't see any of that beauty. All she could see was a stranger staring back at her from the mirror, a young woman playing dress-up in someone else's dream. "Your Royal Highness looks absolutely radiant," murmured one of the Emmanuel designers, circling Diana like a reverent moth around a flame. "The dress fits like it was made for you." It was made for her, of course. Every measurement precise, every seam calculated to the millimeter. But standing there in the cloud of silk and tulle, Diana felt like she was drowning in fabric and expectation. The boutique was filled with the usual retinue. Palace advisors spoke in hushed tones about timing and protocols. Photographers waited to capture the perfect angle. The Emmanuel team fussed over every fold and pleat. Everyone was there to serve the moment, to be part of history in the making. Everyone except Diana herself, who felt increasingly like she was watching her life happen to someone else. "The train will need one more adjustment," David Emmanuel noted, kneeling beside the massive expanse of silk. "Just a touch shorter, so it flows perfectly down the cathedral steps." Diana nodded automatically, the movement she'd been trained to make. Agree, smile. Let others decide the details of your own life. But as she turned to examine the train's length, something shifted inside her chest. A tightness that had been building for weeks, maybe months, suddenly pressed against her rib cage like a trapped bird. The reflection in the mirror showed a princess, but Diana saw a child playing pretend. The dress that should have made her feel beautiful made her feel buried. The tiara perched on her blonde hair felt like a cage rather than a crown. "Your Royal Highness?" David Emmanuel's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Is the length acceptable?" Diana opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing closer. The sweet scent of the roses arranged throughout the boutique became cloying, overwhelming. She could hear her own heartbeat, loud and insistent, drowning out the polite conversation around her. "I," she began, and then stopped. Her reflection wavered in the mirror, and for a terrifying moment, she couldn't tell where the dress ended and she began. That's when she saw her, standing quietly in the corner where the light from the windows couldn't quite reach. Madame Marguerite Dubois had been with the Emmanuel Atelier for over 50 years, though few clients ever spoke to her directly. She was the ghost of the operation, the elderly French seamstress who worked magic with needle and thread, but rarely emerged from her backroom workshop. She was small and slight, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon that had probably looked the same for decades. Her dark eyes, sharp despite her 80 years, seemed to see everything, while revealing nothing. She stood apart from the frenzy, holding her sewing basket with the quiet dignity of someone who had witnessed 1,000 transformations, 1,000 moments when fabric became destiny. And she was watching Diana with an expression that the young bride had never seen before. Not the reverent awe of the designers, not the calculating assessment of the palace advisors, but something that looked almost like understanding. Diana's breathing became shallow. The bodice of the dress, which had fit perfectly just moments before, now felt tight across her chest. Each breath seemed to require tremendous effort, as if the silk and taffeta were conspiring to squeeze the life from her lungs. The room began to tilt slightly, the voices around her becoming a distant murmur, like conversations heard from underwater. She tried to focus on something, anything, to ground herself. The pattern in the Persian rug beneath her feet, the way the afternoon light caught the crystals on the chandelier. But everything seemed to swim before her eyes, reality becoming as fragile as the antique lace adorning her sleeves. "I need," Diana started to say, but the words caught in her throat. The tightness in her chest was spreading, creeping up toward her neck, making it hard to breathe. Her vision began to tunnel, dark edges creeping in from the periphery. She gripped the fabric of her skirt, her knuckles white against the ivory silk, fighting against the overwhelming urge to tear the dress from her body and run. "Your Royal Highness, are you quite all right?" Elizabeth Emanuel approached with concern. "You look rather pale." Diana tried to nod, tried to summon the smile that had carried her through months of engagement appearances and royal training. But something inside her was breaking, like a dam finally giving way after holding back too much pressure for too long. "I can't," she whispered so quietly that only she could hear. But Madame Dubois, still watching from her corner, seemed to hear anyway. The old woman set down her sewing basket and moved with surprising grace across the room. She didn't ask permission from the palace advisors or the Emmanuel designers. She simply walked to Diana's side and placed one weathered hand gently on the young woman's arm. "Mademoiselle," Madame Dubois said softly, her French accent making the words sound like music. "You need some air, no? The back room, it is quieter there." Diana looked into the old woman's eyes and saw something she desperately needed, a place to be human instead of royal, even if just for a moment. "Yes," Diana breathed. "Please." Madame Dubois guided her away from the mirrors, away from the watching eyes and the weight of expectation. "We adjust the sleeves," she announced to the room with quiet authority. 5 minutes only." The back room was a different world, smaller, dimmer, filled with the tools of creation rather than the performance of perfection. Half-finished garments hung from wooden forms like ghosts of future selves. Spools of thread in every conceivable color lined the walls. The air smelled of fabric and French lavender instead of roses and anxiety. Diana sank onto a small velvet chair, the enormous train of her dress pooling around her like spilled cream. For the first time in hours, she could breathe. "This is not about the dress, is it?" Madame Dubois said, settling into her own chair behind an antique sewing machine. Her voice was gentle, matter-of-fact, as if commenting on the weather. Diana looked up, surprised by the directness. No one spoke to her this way anymore. Every conversation was filtered through protocol and politeness. "The dress is beautiful," Diana said automatically. "Oui, it is beautiful. But you, ma petite, you are afraid." The simple statement hit Diana like a physical blow. Afraid. The word she hadn't allowed herself to think, let alone speak aloud. "I shouldn't be," Diana whispered. "Everyone says I'm the luckiest girl in the world. Marrying a prince, becoming a princess. It's every girl's dream." Madame Dubois picked up a piece of delicate lace and began working it with her needle, her movements precise despite her age. "And what is your dream, chérie? Not what everyone says. What do you dream when you are alone in the dark?" Diana felt tears threatening, but she'd been trained not to cry. Princess don't cry in public. They maintain composure. They think of England before themselves. But sitting in this quiet room with this woman who asked direct questions and expected honest answers, Diana felt something crack inside her chest. "I dream about being normal," she whispered, "about marrying someone who loves me more than duty, about having children who can run and play without cameras following them, about making my own choices." "And what did you choose, ma petite? When you said yes to Prince Charles, was it your choice or their choice?" The question hung in the air between them like incense. Diana stared at the elderly seamstress, who continued working her needle through the lace as if they were discussing the weather, rather than the foundation of Diana's entire future. "I," Diana began, then stopped. When had she chosen? When had any of this been her decision? The courtship had felt inevitable from the moment she'd been introduced to Charles. Everyone had expectations, opinions, plans. But when had anyone asked Diana what she wanted? "I was 19, Diana said finally. "I thought I was in love. I thought he was in love with me. And now? Now I think I'm going to marry a man who loves someone else, and the whole world is going to watch me do it." The words escaped before Diana could stop them, hanging in the air like a confession that could never be taken back. She pressed her hand to her mouth, shocked by her own honesty. Madame Dubois set down her needle and looked directly at Diana for the first time since they'd entered the room. Her dark eyes were kind but unflinching. "Ah, ma pauvre petite. You know about the other woman. It wasn't a question. Diana felt the careful walls she'd built around that knowledge begin to crumble. Everyone knew, she realized. Everyone except her was supposed to pretend they didn't know. The phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room, the way Charles's face would soften when he thought she wasn't looking, but not for her. Never for her. The cufflinks with the intertwined C's that he claimed were a family heirloom. The way he would sometimes murmur a name in his sleep that wasn't hers. Camilla, Diana breathed, saying the name aloud for the first time in months. It felt like swallowing glass. He still loves her. He's never stopped loving her, has he? And you, ma chérie, you thought you could make him forget her. Diana's throat tightened with unshed tears. I thought I could be enough. I thought if I was perfect enough, beautiful enough, royal enough, he would choose me. Really choose me. Not just marry me because it's what's expected. But love, it cannot be earned through perfection. It is given freely, or it is not love at all. We. But you know this, and still you put on the dress. Why? Diana looked down at the magnificent gown that suddenly felt like a costume for a play she didn't want to perform. Because it's too late. The invitations are sent. The cathedral is booked. The world is watching. I cannot what? Cannot disappoint them? Cannot tell the truth? Cannot save yourself? Each question was like a small knife, cutting away the layers of pretense Diana had wrapped around herself since the engagement was announced. I can't let everyone down, Diana whispered. The queen, the country, everyone who believes in the fairy tale. Madame Dubois rose from her chair and moved to an old armoire in the corner of the room. She withdrew something wrapped in tissue paper and returned to her seat. Let me tell you a story, ma chérie, about another young woman, long ago, who also wore a beautiful dress and made a choice. She unwrapped the tissue paper to reveal a yellowed photograph. The image showed a young woman in a simple but elegant wedding dress, standing beside a man in military uniform. Both were smiling, but there was something sad in the young woman's eyes. This was my wedding day, 1943. Beautiful dress, non? I made it myself. Every stitch, every button, every piece of lace. It took me 6 months. Diana studied the photograph. The young woman in the picture bore little resemblance to the elderly seamstress before her, but there was something familiar in her expression. I was 22, Madame Dubois continued, madly in love with a young artist named Jean-Luc. But my parents, they arranged for me to marry Henri, a banker from a good family, stable, respectable, safe. Did you love him? Henri? No, I liked him well enough. He was kind in his way. But love? Love was Jean-Luc, with his paint-stained fingers, and his dreams of showing his work in Paris galleries. We would meet in secret, you understand, in cafes where no one knew my family name. He would sketch me while I told him about the dresses I dreamed of creating. He made me feel like I was someone worth drawing, someone worth remembering. The old woman's voice softened, lost in memories that were decades old but still sharp enough to cut. The night before my wedding, Jean-Luc came to my window. He had a train ticket to Paris, enough money for 2. Come with me, Marguerite, he said. We will be poor, but we will be free. We will create beautiful things together. I wanted to go, ma petite. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to climb out that window and run away with him. But you didn't. Non, I was too afraid. Afraid of my parents' shame, afraid of society's judgment, afraid of being poor, afraid of choosing love over security. So I watched him walk away from my window, and the next morning I put on my beautiful dress and married Henri. Diana leaned forward, drawn into the story despite herself. What did you do? I wore the beautiful dress. I smiled for the photographs. I became Madame Henri Dubois and lived respectably ever after. Madame Dubois traced the edge of the photograph with one finger. Henri died 15 years ago. We had a good marriage, I suppose. Quiet, proper, empty. And Jean-Luc? He became quite famous, actually. His paintings hang in museums now. He never married. When I saw his obituary in the newspaper 5 years ago, I realized that he had been waiting for me all along. Diana felt her heart breaking for this woman she barely knew, for the choice that had echoed through decades of quiet regret. "Why are you telling me this?" Madame Dubois carefully rewrapped the photograph and held it against her chest. "Because, ma petite, some cages are so beautiful that we don't realize they are cages until it is too late. Your dress, it is magnificent, but it is still a cage." The words hit Diana like a physical blow. She looked down at the layers of silk and satin, the hand-sewn pearls and intricate beadwork. Every detail was perfect, every element designed to create the image of a fairy tale princess. But underneath all that beauty, she felt trapped. "But what can I do?" Diana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone's expecting me to marry him. The whole country, the Commonwealth, the world. I can't just run away." "Can you not? Who made this rule that you cannot change your mind? That you cannot save yourself? It's not that simple. I'm not just anyone. I'm about to be the Princess of Wales. And before that, who were you?" The question hung in the air. Diana thought about the girl she had been just 2 years ago. Lady Diana Spencer, teaching at a nursery school, sharing a flat with friends, making her own decisions about what to eat, what to wear, where to go. That girl seemed like someone from another lifetime. "I was nobody special," Diana said finally. "Ah, but that is where you are wrong, Cherie. That girl, she was free. Free to love who she chose. Free to make mistakes. Free to be human. This princess they want you to become, she will never be free again." Diana felt tears beginning to spill down her cheeks, probably smudging the careful makeup that had been applied for the fitting. "But if I don't marry him, if I call it off now, I'll humiliate him. I'll humiliate myself. I'll be known forever as the girl who ran away from the fairy tale." Madame Dubois rose from her chair and moved to stand beside Diana. Gently, she lifted the younger woman's chin so their eyes met. "And if you do marry him, knowing what you know, feeling what you feel, you will be known forever as the woman who sacrificed herself for other people's dreams. Which legacy can you live with, ma petite?" The question struck Diana like lightning. In all the months of preparation, all the discussions about protocol and procedure, no one had ever asked her which outcome she could live with. They had only told her what everyone else expected. "I don't know," Diana whispered. "I don't know who I am anymore." "Then perhaps," Madame Dubois said gently, "it is time to find out." They sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound the distant murmur of voices from the main salon. Diana could hear the palace advisors discussing timing and schedules, the photographers checking their equipment, the Emmanuel team making final adjustments to other garments, the machinery of the royal wedding moving forward with inexorable momentum. But in this small back room, time felt suspended. Here Diana could just be a frightened young woman talking to someone who understood the weight of impossible choices. "What would you do?" Diana asked finally. "If you could go back, what would you choose?" Madame Dubois smiled sadly. "Ah, ma chérie, this is not my choice to make again. But if I could speak to that young woman in the photograph, I would tell her what I am telling you. Your life is yours to live. Not your parents, not your country's, not even your prince's. Yours. But the consequences, there are always consequences. The question is whether you can live with the consequences of being true to yourself, or whether you prefer the consequences of being false to everyone else." Diana stood up slowly, the weight of the dress pulling at her shoulders. She walked to the small mirror hanging on the wall of the workroom and looked at herself again. This time, instead of seeing a stranger in a costume, she tried to see the person underneath the silk and expectations. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of course you are. To be human is to be scared, but to be brave is to act despite the fear." Diana turned back to face the elderly seamstress. If I were to change my mind, what would happen to the dress?" Madame Dubois smiled for the first time since they had entered the room. "The dress, ma petite, it is just fabric and thread. Beautiful fabric, expensive thread, but still just materials. It will survive whatever you decide. The question is whether you will." A knock on the workroom door interrupted the moment. "Your Royal Highness?" came the voice of one of the palace advisors. "We're ready to continue with the fitting." Diana looked at Madame Dubois, then at the door, then back at her reflection in the small mirror. For a moment, she could see both possible futures spreading out before her like parallel paths through a forest. One led to the cathedral, to the fairy tale wedding, to a lifetime of duty and protocol and quiet desperation. The other led into uncertainty, into scandal and judgment, but also into possibility. "Your Royal Highness," the voice called again, more insistently. Diana took a deep breath and made her choice. But what that choice was would remain a secret between her and an elderly French seamstress who understood the weight of beautiful cages. Before opening the door, Diana turned back to Madame Dubois one final time. "How do you live with it? The what-ifs? The wondering about the path not taken?" The old woman stood and moved to Diana's side, reaching out to adjust a small detail on the dress with the practiced hands of someone who had spent a lifetime making beautiful things. "You live with it by remembering that every choice creates a new story, ma chérie. Perhaps not the story you imagined, but a story nonetheless. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, you find ways to write beauty into even the most difficult chapters. And if I make the wrong choice, there is no wrong choice, only different ones. But whatever you choose it for yourself, not for the cameras, not for the crowds, not even for the crown. Choose the life you can wake up to every morning without feeling like you are dying inside." Diana nodded, tears threatening once again. In this small back room, surrounded by the tools of creation rather than the instruments of performance, she had found something she hadn't expected: clarity. Not about what the world wanted from her, but about what she wanted for herself. She walked to the door and opened it, stepping back into the world of light and expectation and cameras. The transformation was immediate and heartbreaking to watch. The uncertain young woman became the perfect princess, the doubt replaced by the practiced smile that would carry her through whatever came next. "I'm ready," she said. But whether she was ready for the wedding or ready for something else entirely, only time would tell. 3 days later, on July 29th, 1981, the world watched as Lady Diana Spencer walked down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral. The dress was magnificent, just as perfect as it had been during that final fitting. Every detail was flawless, every element designed to create the image of a fairy tale come to life. Those watching from around the globe saw a radiant bride, a perfect princess, a storybook ending to a whirlwind romance. They saw exactly what they wanted to see. But Madame Marguerite Dubois, watching from her small flat in South London, saw something different. She saw a young woman who had looked into the heart of her own truth and made a choice that would echo through the rest of her life. Whether it was the right choice, only Diana would ever know. The dress hangs in an exhibit now, behind glass, labeled as one of the most famous wedding gowns in history. Visitors admire its beauty, its craftsmanship, its place in the fairy tale that captivated the world. But sometimes late at night when the museum is closed and the lights are dim, if you look closely enough, you might see what Madame Dubois saw in that back room all those years ago. Not just a magnificent gown, but a beautiful cage that held the dreams and fears of a 19-year-old girl who was brave enough to ask herself the most dangerous question of all. Who am I when no one is watching?